He was just the janitor she'd barely noticed, till one late-night question changed both their lives forever. Every night, when the tall glass building in downtown Chicago emptied out, when the chatter of meetings ended, and when the noise of typing and ringing phones finally stopped, a man named Darnell Simmons walked quietly into the lobby. He wore a simple blue uniform, carried a cleaning cart, and had a kind face with deep brown eyes. Most people didn't know his name. He wasn't on any office memo. No one clapped when he entered the building. But he came every single night, without fail, and cleaned the 12th floor. Darnell had worked in this building for over 5 years. He never complained. He always showed up on time. He greeted the security guard downstairs with a gentle nod. He pressed the button for the elevator and rode up alone, listening to the soft humming sound as the floor numbers blinked one by one. The 12th floor was his responsibility. It was where the big executives worked, where the offices had floor 2 ceiling windows, big desks, and nameplates on the doors. It always smelled like coffee, printer ink, and expensive perfume that lingered even after the women wearing it had gone home. Darnell started with the hallway first. He wiped the walls, polished the glass, and vacuumed the carpet.
Ow.
Then he moved from office to office, quietly and carefully. He knew exactly where everything was. He never moved anything that didn't need to be moved. He never opened drawers or touched personal things. He respected people's space, even when they didn't respect him. But there was one office he always saved for last. It belonged to Caroline Markham. She was a young woman, probably in her early 30s. Her name was on the door in bold silver letters, C. Markham, Senior Strategy Director. Her office was beautiful, neat, with framed photos of city skylines, a few motivational quotes on the wall, and a small plant by the window that somehow never died. There was a bookshelf filled with thick reports and leadership books, and a small silver lamp on her desk that stayed on even after she left. Most nights, when Darnell arrived at the 12th floor, Caroline was still inside, working. She would be typing on her laptop, papers scattered around her, her eyes fixed on the screen like the rest of the world didn't exist. She wore simple but expensive clothes, always in soft colors, and her blonde hair was usually tied back in a messy bun. Sometimes she looked up when Darnell passed by the door, but mostly she didn't notice him. Or at least it seemed like she didn't, but Darnell noticed everything. He noticed the way she sat too long without taking a break. He saw how often she skipped lunch. Sometimes the containers from the office cafeteria would sit on her desk, untouched until evening. He noticed how she would sigh deeply and rub her forehead when she thought no one was watching. Never said a word. He just did his job. Cleaned the trash cans, wiped down the desks, made sure everything was in its place. Some nights, Caroline left before Darnell entered. Other times, she was still working when he began cleaning the outer offices. On those nights, he would work slowly, quietly, so as not to disturb her. Sometimes he'd peek into her office and see her deep in thought, staring out the window at the lights of the city, her laptop screen glowing beside her. One night, something small but unusual happened. Caroline was still in her office, typing away, when she looked up and gave him a tiny smile. It wasn't much. Just a polite, quick smile, but it was the first one. Darnell smiled back and nodded. Then he continued his work. The next night, she wasn't there, but something was different. On her desk, near the edge where he usually cleaned, there was a small paper bag and a note on top. It said, "In case you're hungry." See? Inside were 2 neatly wrapped sandwiches. Darnell stared at it for a long time. Was this meant for him? Was this a mistake? After a few seconds, he looked around, then picked up the bag carefully and opened it. The sandwiches were fresh, simple, but good. He smiled to himself and placed the note in his pocket. That night, he saved her office for last again. But this time, not just out of routine. The days passed. Sometimes there was food, sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes Caroline was there when he arrived, sometimes not. But little by little things changed, began to nod at him when he walked by. One night she actually said hi. Another night, when her computer made a loud crashing sound and she groaned loudly, Darnell poked his head in and asked, Everything all right, ma'am? She laughed and said, not really, but thanks for asking. That was the first time. He heard her voice up close, calm, clear, but tired. Over the next few weeks, the small interactions grew. They became something like ... understanding. Not a friendship. Not yet. But something. Caroline began to leave little things behind. A bottle of water, an extra muffin, a handwritten note that said, "You work late like I do?" Darnell began. To say more than just good evening. He'd ask how her day was. Sometimes she answered, sometimes she didn't, but she always smiled, and Darnell started to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. See, no one ever noticed. The janitor. People walked past him every day like he was invisible. But not Caroline. Not anymore. He thought about his life as he cleaned her office, how it used to be so different. He once had his own small business, a car detailing shop on the south side. It wasn't fancy, but it paid the bills. He had regular customers who trusted him. He was proud of what he built. But then the recession hit. Business dried up. Tried to hold on, took loans, worked harder, but it wasn't enough. He had to close the doors. After that, everything changed. His wife got sick. Hospital bills piled up. He lost her 3 years later. Their daughter was grown now, had moved to another state. He didn't want to bother her, so he worked nights, stayed quiet, and lived simply. But these short moments with Caroline reminded him of something he forgot: human connection, kindness, the way two very different people could still understand each other, even if they never said it out loud. One evening, Caroline stayed much later than usual. It was almost midnight. Darnell found her sitting on the floor beside her desk, holding her head in her hands. She looked so different, not like a strong, busy executive, but like a tired, overwhelmed woman. He hesitated at the door, then softly asked, "Miss Markham, you okay?" She looked up, surprised. Her eyes were red. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, honestly, "No, I'm not okay." Darnell didn't say anything. He just stood there, quietly, like a steady presence. After a few moments, she began to talk, slowly at first, then all at once, about how she hated her job some days, about how the pressure was crushing her, about how people expected her to always be perfect, always be sharp, always have answers. But she didn't. Not always. She was exhausted, lonely, scared she was becoming someone she didn't recognize. And Darnell listened. Just listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He just let her speak, nodding every so often, his eyes full of understanding. When she finished, she looked up at him and said, "Thank you." He smiled gently. Sometimes, he said, just saying it out loud helps. That night, when he left her office, he felt something shift inside him, not just in her, in himself. For the first time in a long time, he felt like more than just a cleaner. He felt like a person again. After that, things between them were different, still quiet, still respectful, but warmer. They didn't know each other's full stories yet, but they knew enough. Enough to care, and every night. As the lights in the building faded and the city sparkled outside the windows, Darnell walked onto the 12th floor, knowing that somewhere in that quiet corner office, someone was finally looking up when he entered. The room, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because sometimes, in the most unexpected places, even in a quiet, empty office at midnight, a connection begins. And sometimes, that's enough to start everything else. Darnell noticed how things had started to change. He wasn't sure when it happened exactly, but the small moments between him and Caroline had become part of his routine, something he began to look forward to. The 12th floor, once quiet and cold, now felt different, warmer somehow. He still cleaned every desk, still mopped every floor, but his steps slowed a little when he passed her office. He started noticing little details he hadn't paid attention to before. The way her lamp gave off a soft golden glow. The way she always used blue pens instead of black. The stack of notebooks she kept beside her monitor, all filled with neat handwriting. Caroline had begun to leave small things behind. Sometimes it was food, a sandwich wrapped in foil, a small container of fruit, a bottle of water with a sticky note that said, "Stay hydrated." Other times it was something simple, like a smiley face drawn on a napkin, or a message that read, "Long day." Hope yours is better. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't dramatic. But it meant something. One night, as Darnell entered her office to clean, he noticed a book sitting on the edge of her desk. The cover read Between the World and Me by Tony I. C. Coates. A powerful book, one Darnell had read years ago and never forgotten. He paused, just for a moment, and smiled. The next night, the book was still there, but this time a note was tucked under it. "Have you read this? I just started. It's making me think a lot." Darnell looked at the note, held it gently, and thought for a moment. Then he took a pen from his shirt pocket and scribbled on the back, "Yes, powerful book. Let me know what you think when you finish." He placed the note carefully beside the book, hoping she'd see it. From that night on, the notes became regular. They didn't talk in person much. A wave here, a short goodnight there, but the written messages were a thread that connected them. Caroline began writing more. Short thoughts about her day, questions about music, about life, about what it felt like to grow up in a neighborhood like Darnell's. She asked questions kindly, never like she was studying him, but like she genuinely wanted to understand. One message read, "What kind of music do you listen to while cleaning?" He replied, "Old jazz. Miles Davis, Nina Simone. Sometimes gospel when I need strength." A few days later, he entered her office and noticed a new playlist open on her computer, Darnell's Jazz Picks. He chuckled to himself, quietly, but it warmed his chest. Some nights she was still there when he arrived, not always working. Sometimes just sitting on the couch near the window, staring out at the city lights, her shoes off, a blanket over her lap. She didn't look like a director or a boss then, just like a person. Darnell would nod when he walked by. She'd smile, and they'd exchange a few words about the weather, about how late it was, about nothing and everything. One particularly cold evening, when the streets outside were covered in snow, Darnell arrived to find Caroline sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, eating noodles from a takeout container. She looked up and said, "I've officially given up on being fancy tonight. Want some?" He laughed. It was the first time he'd really laughed in front of her. "Don't tempt me," he said. "Come on," she replied, patting the floor beside her. "There's more than enough." For a moment, Darnell hesitated. It felt strange sitting on the floor of a powerful woman's office, eating noodles like two old friends. Something about the way she looked at him, not as a janitor, not as someone beneath her, but just as a person, made him set down his cart and sit beside her. They ate in silence for a while. The noodles were spicy. The window fogged from the heat inside the room. Outside, snowflakes fell slowly against the dark sky. Then she asked him, "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" He replied, "Whatever you used to do before this." Looked down at the floor, then nodded slowly. "I had my own business once, detailing cars. I was good at it too. Customers used to say I could make a car look brand new at a little shop near South Shore. What happened?" she asked gently. "Economy happened, bills happened, life happened." He paused, lost it all. "And my wife. Cancer. I had to let go of a lot of things." Caroline didn't say anything right away. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "It was a long time ago." "But still," she said, "that sounds really hard." He nodded. It was. They sat for a while longer. The office was quiet, the building almost completely empty. For the first time, they weren't just worker and executive. They were two people sitting side by side, complicated pasts and invisible scars. That night became a turning point. From then on, their conversations deepened. Caroline began sharing more of herself too. She told him about how she grew up in a wealthy suburb and never quite felt like she belonged. How her parents pushed her into business school when she really wanted to study literature. How she worked long hours trying to prove herself in a company full of men who didn't always take her seriously. "It's lonely up here," she said once, looking around her spotless office. "People think success feels good all the time. but most days I just feel ... empty. Darnell understood that feeling. Not the boardrooms or the corner office, but the ache of being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. You ever think about quitting? He asked. She smiled faintly. Almost every week, he laughed. Then you're doing it right. Their bond grew from these late-night moments, moments that no one else saw, that no one else would believe. A black man in a janitor uniform, and a white woman in a leadership role. Two people who, on paper, lived in different worlds, talking about jazz and pain and hope and healing. One night, Carolyn asked him, "Do you believe in second chances?" He looked at her. "I have two, otherwise I wouldn't be here." "I think I'm looking for mine," she whispered. "You'll find it," he said. "Maybe it's already found you." After that, Caroline began to change. Slowly she started asking questions at work that no one else dared to ask. She began looking into company policies, how they treated staff, especially the invisible ones. She started talking to HR about janitorial services, how workers like Darnell were hired by third-party companies and given almost no benefits. She didn't say it was because of him, but Darnell knew. She noticed things more now. It's like the way people didn't say hello to the cleaning crew. It's like how they talked about them like they weren't even there. One afternoon, she walked past a group of interns who laughed at an older custodian who had trouble pushing a heavy cart. She stopped, turned around, and said, "You know that man served in Vietnam, right? Show some respect." The interns went silent. Caroline wasn't just noticing. She was changing, and she credited that to Darnell, though she never said it out loud. One night, she stayed behind later than usual again. Darnell walked into her office and found her pacing back and forth. "You all right?" he asked. "I have this crazy idea," she said. "Oh?" She looked up, eyes wide, cheeks flushed. "What if we started something? I don't know what exactly. A program, maybe? A project? Something that helps people like you, people who get overlooked. A place to share stories, build skills, open doors." Darnell blinked. "People like me?" "I mean," she said quickly, "not just you, but people who've been through it, people who need a second chance, who've had the door shut on them for no reason." Darnell watched her. You could see she meant it. Her words weren't polished. She was nervous. But her heart was in the right place. He didn't say yes. Not right away. But he didn't say no either. "You think anyone would care?" she asked softly. He gave her a small smile. "You care?" To start. The room went quiet. Caroline sat down at her desk and looked out the window. "I think I want to do something that matters," she whispered. "I'm tired of chasing things that don't." Darnell nodded slowly. "Then maybe this is where you begin." And in that moment, quiet, uncertain, but full of hope, a new path began to form. Not a romantic one, not yet, but something deeper, a connection. It's built on truth, respect, and the belief that even two people from completely different worlds could create something powerful together. All they needed was a place to begin, and maybe, just maybe, it could start right here. The air on the 12th floor had changed. It wasn't something you could see or touch. It was there. A soft shift in the silence. A feeling that something was beginning to grow between two people who had never expected their paths to mean anything. Darnell, the janitor who worked nights, and Caroline, the senior executive with the high heels and long hours, were now more than just passing faces in the same building. They were slowly becoming something else. Not friends in the usual sense, but something that felt just as real, maybe even more, almost every night. Just before Darnell began cleaning her office, Carolyn would take a few minutes to talk to him. She'd close her laptop, push her chair back, and look up when he entered. Some nights they talked about the news. Other nights they shared music. They laughed about the silly things in life, vending machines that always jammed, the dying office plant that somehow refused to give up, or the time the fire alarm went off for no reason and they had to stand in the snow at midnight. But on many nights, their conversations turned deeper. Darnell told Carolyn about his past, little by little. He didn't unload everything at once. He spoke like a man who had carried a lot inside for a long time, letting it out slowly, only when he felt it was safe. He told her about his daughter Monica, who lived in Atlanta now and worked as a schoolteacher. He spoke about his wife, Angela, who had loved to sing and used to hum songs while cooking dinner. He talked about how he'd opened his car detailing, his business with his last bit of savings, and how proud he was when people brought their vehicles from across the city just to see what he could do. He even described the smell of the soaps and waxes he used, how the shop always smelled like lemon and leather. Caroline listened, always with care. She didn't interrupt. She didn't pretend to understand everything. But her eyes never left his face, and when he finished speaking, she always said something kind. "She sounds amazing," she said when he talked about his wife. Or, "You were clearly good at what you did," when he spoke about his shop. Those small responses meant the world to Darnell. They told him he mattered, that his stories weren't forgotten, and he wasn't the only one talking. Caroline began opening up too. One night she confessed that her parents never visited her in Chicago. "They still don't really understand why I came here," she said. "They think success means something totally different than what I want."
What do they want for?
"You," Darnell asked. "A husband, a house in the suburbs, 2 kids, a golden retriever," she replied, half smiling. "What I want is, I don't even know. Something real. Something that doesn't just feel like I'm climbing a ladder with no top." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the ladder's leaning against the wrong wall." She looked at him, surprised, and then laughed. Exactly it. That night, as Darnell cleaned her office, he found a napkin beside her keyboard with a doodle of a ladder on it. At the top, instead of a roof or a dollar sign, she'd drawn a little heart. He picked it up, smiled, and left it untouched. More. Nights passed, and their conversations became like old songs, something you didn't realize you missed until you heard them again. They talked about everything. The city's slow buses, the music they grew up with, favorite childhood foods, even old heartbreaks. Caroline admitted that she hadn't been in a real relationship in years, and don't quite know what to do. With a woman who works until 11 p.m. and quotes spreadsheets in her sleep, she joked. Darnell chuckled. "You just haven't found someone who sees past the job title." "Maybe," she replied, "or maybe I stopped looking." One evening, Caroline brought 2 cups of coffee from a shop downtown. She waited for Darnell to arrive and handed him one. It was hot and sweet, just the way he liked it. "Thought you could use a break," she said. He took it carefully, touched. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she replied softly. They sat near the large window, sipping their coffee, watching the lights of the city blink like tiny stars. Below them, Chicago moved like it always did, fast, cold, and unaware of their quiet moment above. It was that same night that Darnell noticed her hands trembling slightly as she held her cup. "You okay?" he asked. "I got some bad news." "Today," she said. "What happened, my team? They're cutting jobs, not mine, not yet. But a lot of people I care about are getting let go." He waited. She continued. "I fought it, told them it was a mistake. But they smiled politely and said it was out of my hands." She paused. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just a well-dressed puppet." He looked at her, really looked, and said gently, "You're more than that. Don't let them take that away from you." Caroline blinked, tears welling up in her eyes. She looked away quickly, wiping them before they could fall. "Thank you," she whispered. Their bond wasn't romantic, not in the traditional sense. There were no confessions, no long stares, no flirting, but there was trust. A deep, steady trust that grew stronger with each night. Darnell had never expected someone like her to see him as anything more than a janitor. And Caroline had never imagined that the one person who truly listened to her in this entire building would be the man who came to clean when everyone else had gone home. Sometimes they didn't talk much at all. Sometimes just sitting in the same room in silence was enough. Darnell would clean while Caroline scribbled notes in her journal or closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. There was peace in those moments, the kind you only find when you feel safe with someone. One late night, when the wind outside was howling and the building creaked in the cold, Caroline stood at the window and said, "You know what's funny? I've worked here for 6 years, and you're the only person I've ever had a real conversation with on this floor." Darnell smiled. Sometimes it takes the quiet to hear what really matters. She nodded slowly. You ever wonder why? We met. He looked at her all the time. They didn't speak for a while after that. But something had settled between them, something unspoken, something real. And yet, even with all the comfort and connection they shared, there was still distance, a line neither of them had crossed, until the night Caroline left a folded piece of paper on her desk. Darnell found it while cleaning. On the front it said, "For you." He opened it carefully and read the words she had written in her neat handwriting. Sometimes the people we least expect come into our lives at exactly the right moment. Thank you for being here, for listening, for reminding me what matters. Was no name signed at the bottom? She didn't need to. That night, Darnell sat in her office chair for a moment. He looked around at the room that had once been just another space to clean. It had become something else now, a place of healing, a place of quiet truth. He folded the note, placed it in his pocket, and continued working. He didn't tell her how much it meant. He didn't need to. She already knew. In the days that followed, their late-night moments continued, but with a deeper sense of understanding. They were no longer just talking. They were witnessing each other's lives. In small ways, but real ways. One night, she shared an idea with him. I want to start something, she said. Not for me, for people like you. People who get looked over, ignored, forgotten. What kind of something? He asked. A mentorship program. Maybe even a fund. Career training. Financial help. Whatever I can do. I don't know where to begin, but I want to begin. Darnell was quiet for a long time. Then he said, start right here. Caroline blinked. What do you mean, this floor? This building? Your team? Start with what you see. Who you see. Start by making space for people who aren't usually invited in. She smiled. You'd help me? Of course, he said. From that night forward, something shifted again. This time not just between them, inside them. They weren't just sharing words anymore. They were beginning to build something. It was still fragile, still forming, but it was real. And in that quiet office on the 12th floor, long after the world had gone to sleep, a black man with calloused hands and a soft voice, and a white woman with tired eyes and a restless heart were proving something powerful. That connection didn't need permission. That respect didn't come from titles. And that sometimes the most meaningful parts of life begin in the most unexpected places. The 12th floor had become more than just an office space for Caroline and Darnell. It had become a quiet world of its own, a place where their talks, silences, and unspoken thoughts floated in the air long after the lights went off. What had started as a few polite exchanges between a janitor and an executive had now grown into something deeper. And while neither of them had called it by any name, both felt it inside, a connection that reached beyond job titles, beyond race, beyond the expectations of the world outside that building. But Caroline couldn't stop thinking about the idea. She had shared with Darnell to start something meaningful. It had been sitting in her mind like a candle that refused to blow out. The thought would come to her in meetings, while brushing her teeth, even when she was walking home in the cold wind. She knew the idea was raw, unshaped, maybe even foolish to some. But every time she remembered the way Darnell listened, without judgment, or how he spoke about being invisible, she felt more certain she had to do something. One Friday night, when the building was almost empty, and the silence of the city below was louder than usual, Caroline stayed late. Her office was dark except for the warm glow of her desk lamp. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't working. She was thinking about courage, about risk, and about whether people like her could truly make a difference in systems built to forget people like Darnell. When she heard the soft squeak of the cleaning cart's wheels in the hallway, she stood up and walked to the door. Darnell was just starting his rounds. He looked surprised to see her standing there, waiting. "You're early tonight," he said. She nodded. "I needed to ask you something." He paused. "Everything okay?" She stepped aside and motioned him into her office. He came in still. Holding his cleaning cloth, Caroline sat on the edge of her desk and looked at him, unsure how to begin. He waited patiently, the way he always did. Then, finally, she asked, "Do you think we could start right here?" Darnell tilted his head. "Start what?" "This idea," she said, her voice softer than usual. "The one I told you about. Something for workers like you, for janitors, security guards, cafeteria staff. The people who keep this building running, but never get invited to the meetings. I don't know exactly what it'll be, but maybe we could build it together. Maybe it could start ... with us." For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. He stepped forward and placed his cloth back on the cart. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were warm. "You really mean that?" he asked. "I do," she said. "I don't have a plan yet. I just have the feeling that it's time to do something that matters. And if I'm being honest ... I need your help. I can't do this alone." He nodded slowly, as if weighing her words in his mind. Then he sat down in the chair across from her and said, "All right. Let's talk." They sat there for over an hour. That night, their conversation shifting from personal dreams to real possibilities. Caroline shared her ideas: workshops on financial literacy, mentorship programs, better access to benefits, maybe even partnerships with local schools. Darnell shared stories from his years of cleaning, how so many janitors had skills and dreams that no one ever saw. Some were artists, some had owned businesses, some were war veterans. All of them had more to offer than just taking out the trash. The more they talked, the more they both began to believe it could really happen. Over the next few weeks, their private conversations turned into something more serious. Caroline began using her free time to research nonprofit models. She reached out quietly to a few colleagues she trusted. Some were supportive, others were confused. "Why are you wasting your time on this?" one coworker asked. "What do you owe them?" Caroline didn't argue. She just smiled and said, "Maybe I'm doing this because I owe myself." She met with the HR director and asked tough questions. How were custodial workers paid? Were they treated fairly? Did they receive health benefits? The answers didn't surprise her. Most were outsourced, underpaid and unseen. Darnell, on his side, began talking to his fellow cleaners, asking them what kind of support they wished they had. Many were skeptical. "What's this white lady gonna do for us?" one older man asked. But Darnell spoke gently, honestly. "She's not promising everything, but she's willing to listen." Slowly, people started to open up. Caroline invited Darnell to lunch, not in secret, but in the company cafe, where everyone could see. It was the first time anyone had seen a senior executive sitting across from a janitor with equal attention. Some people stared, others whispered. Caroline didn't care. She asked Darnell questions and listened carefully as he spoke, occasionally laughing at his stories or shaking her head at the unfairness of them. One junior manager walked by and gave Caroline a strange look. After the lunch, he cornered her and said, "Hey, that was brave of you." "Brave?" she asked. "Yeah, I mean, sitting with him like that." She blinked. "Why would that be brave?" He didn't have an answer. Caroline realized then how deep the problem really was. It wasn't just about rules or policies, it was about hearts. People didn't see the workers who cleaned up after them, who served their food or emptied their bins, as equals. They were invisible in plain sight. That only made her want to work harder. Late one night, as she and Darnell sat in her office, sketching ideas on a whiteboard, she said, "I think we need a name." "For the program?" he asked. "Yeah." Darnell thought for a moment, then he smiled. "How about Start Right Here?" She looked at him, her eyes lighting up. "That's perfect." Just like that, the name was born, a name that held a promise, a beginning, and a belief that change could begin even in the quietest of places. They began planning more seriously. Caroline drafted a proposal. Darnell helped her shape it with real stories. They talked to legal teams, set up meetings with company leadership, and slowly the idea started becoming real. Not everyone was supportive. Some executives dismissed it. Some rolled their eyes, but Caroline didn't give up. She stood in front of the company board one afternoon and gave a short but powerful speech. "We've built a company that looks good on paper," she said, But real strength comes from how we treat the people behind the scenes. The ones who keep the lights on. The ones who clean the floors so we can walk on them. The ones who carry the weight of this building without ever being invited to the table. It's time we change that. The room was quiet when she finished. Some clapped. Some didn't. But she had said what needed to be said. When she returned to her office, Darnell was already there, wiping down her desk. She smiled at him. "I did it." He looked at her with quiet pride. "I never doubted you." Hug. They didn't high-five. They just sat in silence for a few minutes, both knowing that a seed had been planted, one that could grow into something beautiful. That night, as they looked out the window together, watching the city lights blink in the distance, Caroline whispered, "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know this is the first thing I've done in years that feels like it actually matters." Nodded. "You're not just changing things for others. You're changing yourself." She turned to him, tears in her eyes. "Is that a good thing?" "It's the best thing," he said. And in that quiet moment, two people so different on the outside, but connected by something strong on the inside, understood something powerful. They didn't need a permission. They didn't need perfection. They just needed to start, and they had. Right here. The 12th floor didn't feel the same anymore. Everything looked the same. The glass walls, the shining floors, the desks lined in neat rows. But something had changed. Something you couldn't see with your eyes, but you could feel it in the air, like a quiet kind of hope. The idea that started between Caroline and Darnell, two people from completely different worlds, was no longer just an idea. It had become something real. The program they named Start Right Here was now officially launched. At first, it started small. Caroline put together a team of 5 people, some from within the company and some from the outside who worked in community centers and local support groups. Darnell became the unofficial face of it. Even though he didn't have a college degree or a fancy job title, he had experience, wisdom, and stories that could move people in ways no presentation ever could. They turned one of the unused conference rooms on the 12th floor into a space for training and meetings. Caroline arranged for weekly sessions on job skills, resume building, and financial education. She invited speakers who had grown from the bottom up, people who had once been ignored and had managed to build new lives. She made sure janitors, cafeteria workers, security guards, and all the people who were usually left out of conversations were now sitting at the center of them. People in the building were curious. At first, many of them just watched from the sidelines. Some rolled their eyes and said it was just a feel-good project that would fade away like most things do. Others whispered that Caroline was risking her career over janitors. She didn't stop, and Darnell didn't let her feel alone. He showed up early to help set up chairs. He brought in people he knew from his old neighborhood, people who had stories that deserved to be heard. He talked honestly, never pretending to be someone he wasn't. He stood in front of rooms full of strangers and shared his journey. How he lost his business, how he cleaned floors at night while trying to survive, and how one simple conversation with someone who cared had changed everything. The impact was slow at first, but then something shifted. One evening, a young cafeteria worker named Marcus came to a session. He had been working in the building for 2 years, quiet and mostly invisible. But that night, after hearing Darnell speak, he raised his hand and said, "I used to want to be a mechanic. But somewhere along the way, I just stopped believing it was possible." Darnell looked him straight in the eye and said, "You still can. But you got to start right here. Right now, not next week. Not when things get easier. Right here." Marcus smiled. And he showed up to every session after that. Within a few months, more and more workers began joining. Some came for the resources. Some just came to be seen. Caroline made sure everyone who walked in felt welcome. She remembered names, asked about families, and even sat in the back quietly during sessions, just to listen. She never tried to lead the room. She let the people speak. That was her way of showing respect. News of the program slowly spread beyond their building. A local journalist wrote a story titled "The Janitor and the Executive Who Decided to Care." It went viral. Soon, other companies in the area started calling. Some wanted to copy the idea. Some wanted to partner. Carolyn and Darnell didn't care about the attention. What mattered to them was that people were finally paying attention to those who had been invisible for too long inside the office. Things had changed too. People who used to walk past the cleaning crew without a glance now said hello, even stopped to ask how their day was. Interns who once ignored the security guards started bringing them coffee. A few managers began asking their teams to attend Start Right Here events, not as an obligation, but to listen and learn. It wasn't a perfect change. There were still people who rolled their eyes or whispered in corners, but the shift was real. And it started with two people who believed that kindness and respect were more powerful than position. Darnell, who had once moved through the building like a shadow, now walked with quiet pride. People greeted him by name. Some even asked for his advice. Still clean the floors. He never stopped doing his job, but now he did it with the knowledge that his voice mattered. Caroline, on the other hand, had never been more alive. She had spent years chasing goals she thought were important, promotions, awards, recognition, but none of those things had given her the feeling that Start Right Here gave her. She felt lighter, more real. For the first time in her career, she didn't feel like a puppet in a polished suit. She felt like herself. One evening, several months after the program began, Caroline and Darnell sat in her office, looking out the window as the sun dipped behind the skyline. "It's been a long journey," she said quietly. Darnell nodded. "Still more to go," she smiled. "I never thought my life would turn out like this. Better or worse?" "Asked different," she replied, but in a good way. There was a silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people understand each other without having to speak. Then she said something she had been holding in for a while, She began, "This all started because of a sandwich." Darnell laughed on a sticky note. "That's the crazy part," she said, shaking her head. "We never planned this. It just ... happened." He looked at her seriously for a moment and said, "That's how the best things happen." They sat there, both thinking about how far they had come from a lonely janitor and a stressed-out executive who barely noticed each other, to a team that had created something powerful and lasting. Caroline turned to him again. "Do you think this will last?" "It's only if we keep feeding it," Darnell replied. "Feeding it? Oh, respect, honesty, the things that started it." She nodded slowly. "Then we will." Later that night, Carolyn walked the building, one last time before leaving. As she passed the main hallway, she saw a group of cleaning staff sitting together, talking and laughing. She paused and listened. They were discussing an upcoming workshop on financial planning. One of them said, "Can you believe someone actually thought of us for once?" Caroline smiled and walked away, heart full. Meanwhile, Darnell walked the 12th floor, mop in hand, humming a jazz tune softly under his breath. The building was quiet again, just like it used to be. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't just the floors that were clean now. Something in the air had been cleared too. Like a weight had been lifted. As he entered Caroline's office to wipe down the desk, he noticed a new frame on the wall. It was a photo of the first group of participants from Start Right Here. At the bottom, written in bold letters, it said, "Everyone has a story. Everyone deserves a beginning. Let it start right here." Darnell stood still for a moment, reading the words. He felt something rise in his chest, not pride exactly, but something even deeper, purpose. And then, without thinking, he whispered to himself, "We really did it." Weeks turned into months. The program grew. New ideas were added, mentorships with company staff, scholarships, community partnerships. Caroline was invited to speak at conferences. Darnell was asked to join boards as a community advisor. Their bond grew too, still rooted in mutual respect, still quiet, still full of care. There were no labels for what they were. They didn't need one. They had found each other in a world that rarely allowed people like them to connect. They did. And that connection changed everything. And every time someone asked how it all started, this program, this movement, this strange and beautiful partnership, Caroline would simply say, "It started with one question. One night, one man who reminded me that sometimes The most powerful change doesn't need a big plan. It just needs the courage to begin right here. And Darnell, if asked the same, would say, "It started the day someone looked past my uniform and saw me, not as a worker, not as a number, but as a man." In a city full of noise and motion, in a tall glass building where most people only looked, ahead or down, two souls had dared to look at each other, really look, and because of that, everything changed. It didn't end with a kiss. It didn't need to. It ended with respect, with kindness, with purpose, and with the quiet belief that even in the middle of the night, the most unlikely place, a new beginning could rise. Steady, slow, and strong, as long as someone had the heart to ask. Do you think we could start right here?